The single gunshot that echoed through the canyon that morning in June of 1878 sent every bird within a mile radius into panicked flight. But Rosa Hartwell barely flinched as she continued pulling yarrow roots from the rocky soil near Santa Rosa, New Mexico territory. She had grown accustomed to the sounds of violence that occasionally punctuated the otherwise peaceful landscape, though she never welcomed them. Her fingers worked methodically through the earth, collecting the medicinal plants she needed for her work, the cotton sack at her hip already bulging with sage, chamomile, and wild mint. The sun beat down mercilessly on her wide-brimmed hat, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath her simple calico dress. But Rosa had learned long ago that the best healing herbs grew in the harshest conditions, and she refused to let discomfort stop her from gathering what the people of Santa Rosa desperately needed. She was 22 years old and had been the town's herbalist for nearly 4 years, ever since her grandmother passed away and left Rosa with both her knowledge and her calling. The work was demanding and often thankless, but Rosa found purpose in it. When Dr. Morrison was unavailable, or his services too expensive for the poorer families, which was often, people came to Rosa. She treated burns, fevers, stomach ailments, and countless other maladies with her tinctures, poultices, and teas. Her small adobe house on the edge of town had become a sanctuary for those who suffered, and she took that responsibility seriously. The sound of hoofbeats approaching made Rosa look up from her work, one hand instinctively moving to shade her eyes as she squinted toward the horizon. A lone rider was coming her way, sitting tall in the saddle despite what appeared to be an awkward angle to his posture. As he drew closer, Rosa could see that he was clutching his left arm against his body, and dark stains marked his sleeve. Her healer's instincts kicked in immediately, and she stood, brushing the dirt from her skirt. The rider was a cowboy, that much was clear from his worn leather chaps, dusty boots with spurs that caught the sunlight, and the weathered Stetson that shadowed his face. He pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance from Rosa, and she could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes, though he was making a valiant effort to mask it. "Madam," he said, his voice rough but polite, "I heard there was an herbalist who worked these hills. Would that be you?" "It would," Rosa replied, already moving toward him with her bag. "You are injured. Let me see that arm." He hesitated for a moment, and Rosa caught a glimpse of green eyes beneath the brim of his hat before he slowly dismounted. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His brown hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and despite the obvious pain he was in, he moved with a controlled grace that spoke of someone comfortable in his own body. "Name is Kane Thornton," he said, extending his right hand before seeming to think better of it, given the circumstances. "I work at the Triple Cross Ranch about 15 miles north of here. Had a disagreement with a rustler this morning. He got a shot off before I convinced him to leave our cattle alone." "Did you kill him?" Rosa asked bluntly as she gently took hold of Kane's injured arm, examining the blood-soaked fabric. "No, madam, just scared him off. The bullet went clean through my arm, though, and I have been riding for near 2 hours trying to find help. Doc Morrison was not at his office in town. He rode to Las Vegas yesterday for a medical conference. Will not be back for 3 days, Rosa explained, carefully cutting away the fabric of his shirt to expose the wound. She was relieved to see that Kane had been right. The bullet had passed through the meat of his upper arm without hitting bone or any major blood vessels. It was a clean wound, relatively speaking, though it would need thorough cleaning and proper dressing to prevent infection. "You are fortunate, Mr. Thornton," This should heal well if properly cared for. "Please, just call me Kane," he said, and Rosa detected the faintest tremor in his voice, the only indication he gave of the pain he must be feeling. "Rosa," she replied simply. "Rosa Hartwell, now sit down before you fall down. You have lost blood, and I need to clean and dress this wound properly." Kane lowered himself to a nearby rock with a grace that surprised her, given his injury. Rosa worked quickly, pulling supplies from her gathering bag. She always carried the essentials when she went into the hills, having learned long ago that emergencies did not wait for convenient timing. She had clean cloth, a small bottle of whiskey for sterilizing, needle and thread, and several varieties of dried herbs that she kept in small pouches. "This is going to hurt," she warned as she uncorked the whiskey bottle. Kane simply nodded, his jaw tightening in anticipation. When Rosa poured the alcohol over the wound, he made no sound, though she saw his hand grip the rock beneath him with enough force that his knuckles turned white. She worked efficiently, cleaning the entry and exit wounds thoroughly before applying a paste made from ground yarrow and honey, both known for their ability to prevent infection and promote healing. "You handle pain well," Rosa observed as she began wrapping clean cloth around his arm, securing the poultice in place. "Comes with the territory," Kane replied, his voice steadier now that the worst of the treatment was over. "A man in my line of work gets kicked, thrown, gored, and trampled with some regularity. You learn to either tolerate pain or find a different profession. What brought you to New Mexico territory?" Rosa asked, partly to keep him talking and alert, partly because she found herself genuinely curious about this stoic cowboy who had literally stumbled into her path. "Work, same as most folks," Kane said. "I am from Texas originally, but the Triple Cross was hiring and I needed a change of scenery. Came out here about 2 years back and found I liked the land. It is harsh but honest, if that makes any sense." Rosa smiled slightly as she tied off the bandage. "Perfect sense. The desert does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. There is something refreshing about that kind of honesty." "That is exactly it," Kane said, and when Rosa looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how close they were standing. She stepped back, busying herself with repacking her supplies. "You should rest before you ride back," she said, keeping her tone professional. "You have lost blood and the journey is not an easy one. There is shade by those cottonwoods near the creek." "I have already taken up enough of your time," Kane protested, but Rosa noticed he made no move to stand. "Nonsense. I would not be much of a healer if I patched you up only to let you pass out and fall off your horse halfway home." She gestured toward the trees. "Come on. Your horse could use water anyway, and I have jerky and hardtack in my bag if you are hungry." Kane did not argue further, and they walked slowly toward the shade, his horse following obediently behind. The creek that ran through this particular canyon was one of Rosa's favorite spots, a reliable water source that attracted both wildlife and the plants she needed for her work. The cottonwoods provided blessed relief from the relentless sun, and the sound of water moving over rocks created a peaceful backdrop. Once Kane was settled on the creek bank, his horse contentedly drinking nearby, Rosa found herself at an unusual loss for what to do next. Normally, when she treated someone, it was a quick interaction. They came to her house, she provided treatment, they left. This situation was different, more intimate somehow, despite the practical circumstances that had brought them together. "You were gathering plants when I rode up," Kane said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Is that what you do, collect herbs for medicine?" "Yes," Rosa replied, relieved to have a concrete topic to discuss. "Different plants have different properties. Yarrow, Like what I used on your arm, helps stop bleeding and prevents infection. Chamomile soothes the stomach and helps people sleep. Sage can help with inflammation and sore throats. My grandmother taught me which plants to use for what ailments, where to find them, and when to harvest them. Sounds like it takes a lot of knowledge, Kane observed, genuine interest in his voice. It does, Rosa agreed, but I find it fascinating. Every plant is like a small miracle, perfectly designed to serve a purpose. You just have to know how to unlock their potential. I never thought about it that way, Kane said. To me, plants were just things that cows ate or that got in the way when you were trying to work. Rosa laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. I suppose from a cowboy's perspective that makes sense. But there is a whole world in these hills that most people never notice. Take that plant right there. She pointed to a low-growing succulent with thick, fleshy leaves. That is desert marigold. The roots can be made into a tea that helps with respiratory problems. And that tall one with the purple flowers is desert lavender. It helps with anxiety and promotes restful sleep. Kane looked at the plants with new appreciation. Your grandmother must have been a remarkable woman to know all of this. She was, Rosa said softly. She came here from Missouri with my grandfather in the 40s. He died of cholera when my mother was just a baby, but grandmother refused to leave. She said this land had claimed a piece of her heart, and she would not abandon it. She learned about the plants from a Navajo woman who helped her through that first terrible year after grandfather died. Eventually, she became known throughout the territory for her healing skills. And she taught you everything she knew, she tried to, Rosa said. I wish I had paid better attention when I was younger. I thought I had more time to learn from her. She seemed so strong, so eternal. When she died suddenly, I realized how much knowledge I had not yet absorbed. I have been learning ever since, sometimes from old notes she left, sometimes through trial and error. That must be frightening, Kane said quietly. Having people depend on you when you are still figuring things out yourself. Rosa met his eyes, surprised by his perceptiveness. It is terrifying, she admitted, but someone has to do it. Dr. Morrison is a good man, but he cannot be everywhere, and his services cost money that many folks do not have. I charge what people can afford, which is often nothing at all, but that is all right. My grandmother never turned anyone away, and neither will I. That is admirable, Kane said, and Rosa could hear the sincerity in his voice. Most people I know are mainly concerned with looking out for themselves. What about you? Rosa asked. You risked your life confronting that rustler this morning instead of just letting him take the cattle. That was not looking out for yourself. Kane shrugged with his good shoulder. Those cattle represent the ranch's livelihood. The Triple Cross employs 20 men, and all of them depend on the ranch succeeding so they can feed their families. Besides, I gave the rustler a chance to ride away before things got ugly. He made his choice. They talked for over an hour, conversation flowing easily despite the strangeness of their meeting. Kane told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys, and how he had learned to ride before he could walk. He spoke of his mother's death when he was 12, and how his father had become hard and distant afterward, driving Kane and his brothers away one by one with his bitterness and drinking. Rosa shared her own story, how her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn son when Rosa was 15, leaving her alone with her aging grandmother. Her father, a prospector, had died in a mine collapse when Rosa was just a baby, a man she knew only from her mother's stories and a single faded photograph. Seems like we have both known our share of loss, Kane observed. That is life in this territory, Rosa replied. The land is beautiful but brutal. It takes as much as it gives, sometimes more. You learn to appreciate what you have while you have it because nothing is guaranteed. Kane nodded slowly, his eyes distant. That is the truth. I have seen good men die from simple accidents, and I have seen ornery cusses live to be ancient despite their best efforts to kill themselves with whiskey and stupidity. There does not seem to be much rhyme or reason to it, which is why we have to make our own meaning, Rosa said. We help who we can when we can, and we try to leave things a little better than we found them. Is that why you spend your days wandering the hills alone, gathering plants? Kane asked. To make things better, partly, Rosa admitted, but also because I love it out here. In town, I am always the herbalist, the healer, the woman people come to with their problems. Out here, I am just Rosa. I can think my own thoughts, enjoy the silence, feel connected to something larger than myself. I understand that, Kane said. Some of my best moments are when I am out with the herd, just me and the cattle and the land stretching out in every direction. Makes you feel small but also part of something bigger at the same time. Rosa glanced at the sun, noting its position with the practiced eye of someone who spent most of her time outdoors. You should probably start back soon if you want to reach the ranch before dark. How is your arm feeling? Kane flexed his injured arm carefully, wincing slightly but nodding. Better than it has any right to feel, thanks to you. What do I owe you for the treatment? Nothing, Rosa said firmly. You interrupted my plant gathering, but I can finish that after you leave. Besides, you will need to keep that bandage clean and change it regularly. Come by my house in town tomorrow, and I will check the wound and give you fresh dressings. I could not possibly just take your help without paying, Kane protested. Then pay me by surviving the ride home without fainting, Rosa said, a slight smile softening her words. And by following my instructions about caring for that wound. Too many men think they are invincible and end up with infections that could have been easily prevented. Kane stood slowly, testing his balance. The rest and food had clearly helped, and he looked much steadier than he had when he first arrived. You have a deal, Miss Hartwell. I will come by tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. That would be fine, Rosa said, aware of an odd reluctance to see him leave. She had enjoyed their conversation more than she wanted to admit, and the thought of returning to her solitary plant gathering suddenly seemed less appealing than it had that morning. Kane mounted his horse with some difficulty, favoring his injured arm, but he managed it with minimal wincing. Once in the saddle, he looked down at Rosa, his green eyes warm. Thank you, Rosa. You probably saved me from a much worse situation. I am in your debt. No debt, Rosa insisted. Just take care of yourself. She watched as he rode away, his figure gradually shrinking against the vast landscape until he finally disappeared around a bend in the canyon. Only then did Rosa return to her plant gathering, but she found her mind wandering repeatedly to the injured cowboy and their unexpected conversation. There had been something about Kane Thornton, a steadiness and quiet strength that she found appealing. He had not tried to impress her or downplay his pain to seem tough. He had simply been himself, honest and direct, and Rosa appreciated that more than she could say. The rest of the day passed slowly. Rosa gathered enough herbs to replenish her supplies, but her heart was not fully in the work. She kept replaying their conversation, remembering the way Kane's eyes had lit up when she explained the properties of different plants, how he had listened with genuine interest rather than the polite but distant attention most people gave when she talked about her work. By the time Rosa returned home that evening, her gathering sack full and her muscles pleasantly tired from the day's exertion, she had convinced herself that her interest in Kane was purely professional. He was an injured patient, nothing more, and her concern for his well-being was exactly what it should be. The fact that she found herself looking forward to seeing him tomorrow was simply because she wanted to ensure his wound was healing properly. The rationalization lasted until she caught herself taking extra care with her appearance the next afternoon, changing her dress twice and spending more time than usual arranging her dark hair. Rosa stared at her reflection in the small mirror that hung in her bedroom, noting the heightened color in her cheeks and the brightness in her brown eyes. "This is foolish," she told herself firmly. "He is just a patient. You are a professional." But when Kane knocked on her door that afternoon, looking considerably better than he had the previous day, Rosa felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with professional concern, and everything to do with the smile he gave her when she opened the door. "Right on time," she said, stepping back to let him enter. "How has the arm been?" "Sore but manageable," Kane replied, removing his hat as he stepped into her small front room. His eyes took in the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, the shelves lined with jars and bottles of various tinctures and preparations, the well-worn books stacked on a corner table. "This is quite a setup you have here." "It serves its purpose," Rosa said, gesturing toward a chair near the window where the light was best. "Sit down and let me see that wound." Kane complied, and Rosa carefully unwrapped the bandage, pleased to see that the wound looked clean with no signs of infection. The edges were beginning to close and the inflammation was minimal. "You have been keeping it clean," she observed approvingly. "Following the healer's orders," Kane said. "I may be stubborn, but I am not stupid." Rosa cleaned the wound again, applied fresh poultice, and rewrapped it with clean bandages. As she worked, she was intensely aware of Kane's proximity, the warmth of his skin under her fingers, the faint scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him. Her hands trembled slightly, and she hoped he did not notice. "There," she said, tying off the bandage and stepping back. "That should do it. Come back in 3 days and we will check it again. By then, we might be able to leave the bandage off entirely and just keep the wound covered with clean cloth." 3 days, Kane repeated. "I suppose I could manage that." An awkward silence fell between them. Rosa knew she should see him out, return to the work that was always waiting, but she found herself reluctant to end the visit. Kane seemed equally reluctant to leave, his hat turning slowly in his hands as he remained seated. "Would you like some coffee?" Rosa heard herself asking. "I was about to make some anyway." "I would like that very much," Kane said, relief evident in his voice. Rosa busied herself with the coffee pot, grateful for something to do with her hands. She could feel Kane watching her as she worked, and the attention made her self-conscious in a way she was not accustomed to feeling. She had spent the last 4 years being seen primarily as a healer, a role rather than a person, and having someone look at her with such obvious interest was both thrilling and unsettling. "How did you end up living alone out here?" Kane asked as Rosa handed him a cup of coffee and settled into the chair opposite his. "Seems like it would be lonely, especially for a young woman." "Sometimes it is," Rosa admitted, "but I have my work and that keeps me busy. People come and go all day with various ailments. And I have friends in town, other women I have known since childhood. It is not a bad life." "But it is not the life you imagined for yourself when you were younger," Kane guessed perceptively. Rosa smiled ruefully. "No, I suppose not. When I was a girl, I thought I would get married, have children, maybe move to a bigger city like Albuquerque or Santa Fe. But life had other plans. After Mother died, Grandmother needed me. And then she died and the town needed me. Sometimes our paths choose us rather than the other way around." "Do you regret it?" Kane asked quietly. Rosa considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I miss what might have been sometimes, but I cannot regret the work I do. I have saved lives, eased suffering, brought comfort to the dying. That means something. That matters." "It does," Kane agreed. "More than most things, I would say." They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from the mundane to the profound. Kane told her about the Triple Cross Ranch, how the owner, Mr. Carson, was a fair man who treated his cowboys well and paid them honestly. He described the work, the long hours and physical demands, but also the satisfaction of a job well done, of seeing cattle thrive under his care, of being part of something larger than himself. Rosa found herself sharing things she rarely discussed with anyone. Her fears about not being skilled enough to help everyone who came to her, her frustration with the limitations of her knowledge, her longing for someone to share her life with, even as she convinced herself that such desires were selfish given the demands of her calling. "That is not selfish," Kane said firmly when she voiced this last concern. "Everyone needs companionship. Everyone needs to feel like they matter to someone as a person, not just for what they can do or provide. There is nothing wrong with wanting that. But how do I balance it?" Rosa asked, voicing a question that had plagued her for years. "My work demands so much. Someone who cared for me would constantly be coming second to whoever needed my help at that moment. What man would accept that?" "The right man would not just accept it," Kane said, leaning forward with an intensity that made Rosa's breath catch. "He would admire it. He would be proud of what you do, not resentful of it. He would understand that your calling is part of who you are, and he would love you for it, not in spite of it." The way Kane looked at her when he said those words made Rosa's heart race. There was no mistaking the meaning behind them, the implication that he might be describing himself. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility, and Rosa found herself frozen, unable to look away from his green eyes. The moment was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Rosa blinked, the spell shattered, and rose quickly to answer it. A young boy stood on her doorstep, out of breath and clearly agitated. "Miss Hartwell," he gasped. "My mama needs you right away. She is burning up with fever and my little sister is sick too. Please, can you come?" "Of course," Rosa said immediately, already reaching for her medical bag. She glanced back at Kane apologetically. "I am sorry I have to go." "I understand," Kane said, rising and settling his hat back on his head. "Duty calls. I will see you in 3 days." "Yes," Rosa confirmed, already following the boy out the door. 3 days. She glanced back once to see Kane standing in her doorway, watching her leave with an expression she could not quite read. Then she turned her attention fully to the boy who was leading her toward his family's small house on the poor side of town, her mind shifting into healer mode even as a part of her remained focused on the cowboy she was leaving behind. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. The fever that had struck the boy's mother and sister turned out to be sweeping through several families in town, keeping Rosa running from house to house with her remedies and treatments. She barely slept, catching a few hours here and there between patients, surviving on coffee and the food that grateful families pressed upon her. By the time Kane's appointment arrived, Rosa was exhausted but satisfied. The fever had broken in all her patients, and while they would need time to recover their strength, the immediate danger had passed. She had just returned home and was contemplating the novel idea of a full night's sleep when Kane knocked on her door. "You look terrible," he said bluntly when she opened the door, concern evident in his face. "Good afternoon to you too," Rosa replied dryly, but without any real annoyance. She knew she must look a fright, her hair escaping from its pins, her dress rumpled from 3 days of continuous wear, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. "I am serious," Kane said, following her inside. "When was the last time you slept?" "I got a few hours 2 nights ago," Rosa said, stifling a yawn. Or was it 3 nights ago? Honestly, I have lost track. That is it, Kane said decisively. You are going to sit down and I am going to make you something to eat. Then you are going to sleep for at least 8 hours while I keep watch and turn away anyone who comes to the door unless it is a genuine emergency. You cannot do that, Rosa protested weakly. People need me. People need you to be healthy and alert, not run into the ground from exhaustion, Kane countered. Besides, I suspect you have been telling your fever patients to rest and take care of themselves while doing the exact opposite yourself. Practice what you preach, healer. Rosa wanted to argue, but she was too tired, and truthfully, the idea of having someone take care of her for a change was almost irresistibly appealing. She sank into her chair and watched as Kane moved competently around her small kitchen, finding bread, cheese, and dried apples to make a simple but substantial meal. "How is your arm?" she asked as he worked. "Healing beautifully, thanks to you," Kane replied. "Barely hurts at all now. See." He demonstrated by moving his arm through a full range of motion with only minimal wincing. "You should still be careful with it for another week or so," Rosa advised, but she was pleased with how well the wound was mending. Kane brought her food and watched with satisfaction as she ate, too hungry to be self-conscious about her appetite. The simple meal tasted better than anything she had eaten in days, probably because someone else had prepared it, and she could simply enjoy it without worrying about anything else. "Now sleep," Kane ordered when she had finished. "I will be right here if anyone needs anything." "Your ranch," Rosa protested. "They will be expecting you." "I told Mr. Carson I might be gone all day getting my arm checked," Kane said. "He gave me the day off." "Now stop arguing and go lie down before you fall down." Rosa was too exhausted to protest further. She retreated to her small bedroom and collapsed onto her bed, not even bothering to remove her dress or shoes. Sleep claimed her instantly, deep and dreamless, her body finally surrendering to the demands she had been making of it. When she woke, the light slanting through her window told her it was late afternoon of the following day. Rosa sat up with a start, horrified that she had slept so long, and stumbled out of her bedroom to find Kane still there, sitting in her chair reading one of her grandmother's old journals. "You are still here," she said stupidly, still foggy from sleep. "I am still here," Kane confirmed, setting the journal aside. "And before you panic, I handled everything. A woman came by with a cut finger. I cleaned it and bandaged it just like I watched you do with my arm. A man came asking for something for his wife's headache. I gave him some of that chamomile tea you have in the blue jar, told him to have her drink it and rest in a dark room. And I turned away 3 people who just wanted to gossip and had no actual medical needs." Rosa stared at him, somewhere between grateful and horrified. "Kane, you cannot just practice medicine without training. What if you had done something wrong?" "Then I would have come and woken you," Kane said reasonably. "But everything I dealt with was minor, and I only did what I had seen you do or what seemed like common sense. Besides, you needed the rest. You look much better now, more like a person and less like a ghost." Rosa could not help but laugh at his blunt assessment. "Thank you, I think, and thank you for staying. You did not have to do that, I know," Kane said softly. "I wanted to." Their eyes met and held, and Rosa felt that same electric charge she had felt 3 days ago before they were interrupted. This time, there was no knock at the door, no emergency to pull her away. This time, there was just the two of them, alone in the golden afternoon light and the tension that had been building between them since their first meeting. "Rosa," Kane said, his voice low and intense. "I need to say something, and I need to say it before I lose my nerve or before another emergency pulls you away. These past few days, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. The way you care for people, the way you talk about your work, the way you push yourself past exhaustion because you cannot stand the thought of someone suffering when you might be able to help. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I would very much like to court you properly if you would allow it. Rosa's heart hammered in her chest. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, to throw caution to the wind and follow where her feelings were leading. But another part, the practical part that had learned not to trust in temporary happiness, held her back. "Kane, I barely know you," she said carefully. "We have only met a few times. You could be a completely different person than who I think you are." "Then let me prove myself," Kane said, rising from his chair and crossing to where she stood. He did not touch her, respecting her space, but his presence was overwhelming in the small room. "Let me come calling. Let me show you the kind of man I am. If you decide I am not what you want, I will accept that and walk away. But give me a chance, Rosa. Give us a chance." Rosa looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity and finding none. What she saw instead was hope mixed with vulnerability, the look of a man who was putting his heart on the line without knowing how it would be received. "All right," she heard herself say. "Yes, you can come calling, but I need you to understand that my work comes first. There will be times when I have to cancel plans or cut visits short because someone needs me. There will be emergencies that take precedence over everything else. If you cannot accept that, then we should stop this before it starts." "I can accept it," Kane said immediately. "I would never ask you to be anything other than who you are, Rosa. Your calling is part of what makes you who you are. I understand that." "Then yes," Rosa said again, a smile breaking across her face. "Yes, you can court me." Kane's answering smile was brilliant, transforming his normally serious face into something bright and almost boyish. "Can I take you to dinner? There is a new restaurant in town that is supposed to be quite good." "I would like that," Rosa said, "but give me an hour to make myself presentable." "I am not going anywhere looking like this." Kane laughed, the sound rich and warm. "You look beautiful to me, but I will give you all the time you need. I will go back to my hotel, get cleaned up myself, and return in an hour." "Does that work?" "Perfect," Rosa agreed. After Kane left, Rosa leaned against the closed door, her mind reeling from how quickly her life had just changed direction. Just a few days ago, she had been resigned to a solitary existence, convinced that her calling precluded the possibility of romantic love. Now, suddenly, impossibly, there was Kane Thornton with his honest green eyes and his willingness to accept her exactly as she was. She pushed away from the door and hurried to prepare herself, heating water for washing, selecting her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the warm tones in her skin and made her eyes look even darker. She took down her hair and brushed it thoroughly before repinning it in a more elegant style than her usual practical bun. When she studied her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked happy, she realized with some surprise. Genuinely, radiantly happy in a way she had not been in years. Kane returned precisely an hour later, looking equally transformed. He had shaved and changed into clean clothes, his hair still slightly damp from washing. When Rosa opened the door, he simply stared at her for a long moment before remembering to speak. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Rosa flush with pleasure. "Thank you," she replied. "You clean up rather well yourself." The restaurant Kane took her to was indeed new, opened just a few weeks earlier by a couple from back east who were trying to bring a touch of sophistication to Santa Rosa. The food was better than Rosa had expected, and the atmosphere was pleasant, with oil lamps providing warm light and checkered tablecloths, adding a homey touch. but Rosa barely noticed any of it. Her entire focus was on Kane, on their conversation that flowed as easily as it had that first day by the creek. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. Kane told her about his desire to someday own his own small ranch. Nothing fancy, just enough land to run a modest herd and live simply. Rosa confessed her secret dream of writing a comprehensive guide to the medicinal plants of New Mexico territory, preserving her grandmother's knowledge for future generations. "You should do it," Kane said encouragingly. "That would be an incredible legacy." "It would take years," Rosa said. "And I barely have time as it is." "Then I will help you," Kane offered. "I may not know anything about plants now, but I can learn. I can help you gather specimens, take notes, whatever you need. You should not have to give up on your dreams just because you are busy." Rosa felt tears prick her eyes at his immediate, unconditional support. "You would really do that, of course," Kane said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "That is what people do when they care about each other. They help each other reach for the things that matter." They lingered over dinner long after they had finished eating, reluctant to let the evening end. Finally, the restaurant owner began giving them pointed looks, and they reluctantly acknowledged that it was time to leave. Kane walked Rosa home through the quiet streets of Santa Rosa, the night air cool and pleasant after the heat of the day. At her door, there was an awkward moment where neither of them seemed sure of the proper etiquette. Kane solved it by taking Rosa's hand gently in his own, raising it to his lips and placing a soft kiss on her knuckles. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," he said. "May I call on you again soon?" "I would like that very much," Rosa replied, her hand tingling where his lips had touched it. After Kane left, Rosa floated through her evening routine in a daze of happiness. She had not felt this way since she was a girl, this combination of excitement and anticipation and pure joy. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. True to his word, Kane came calling regularly over the following weeks. He would arrive in the late afternoon when his work at the ranch was done, often dusty and tired from a long day, but always making the effort to spend time with her. Sometimes they would go for walks around town or out into the hills. Sometimes they would simply sit in Rosa's small parlor and talk while she worked on preparing medicines or organizing her supplies. Kane kept his promise to help with her plant gathering, and Rosa discovered that he was an apt pupil, quick to learn the distinguishing features of different species and genuinely interested in their properties. They spent several Sundays hiking into the hills together, Rosa teaching Kane about the plants while he helped her harvest and carry the heavy bags of herbs back to town. On one such expedition, about 6 weeks after they began courting, they stopped to rest beside a small spring that bubbled up from between the rocks. The day was hot, even for late July, and they were both grateful for the shade of a lone piñon pine and the coolness radiating from the water. "I have been thinking," Kane said as they sat side by side on a sun-warmed boulder. "Mr. Carson has offered me the position of ranch foreman. It is more responsibility but also better pay and a small house on the ranch property instead of the bunkhouse with the other hands." "That is wonderful," Rosa said enthusiastically. "You must have impressed him with your work." "I think it is more that I have been there longer than most of the other cowboys, and I do not spend my wages on whiskey and gambling," Kane said dryly. "But regardless of the reason, it is a good opportunity. The thing is, the house is meant for a married man and his family. Mr. Carson assumes that is my situation or will be soon." Rosa's heart began to race. Was Kane leading where she thought he was leading? What did you tell him? Kane turned to face her fully, taking both of her hands in his. I told him I would need to speak with someone before I could give him an answer. Rosa, these past 6 weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know it is fast, maybe too fast by conventional standards, but out here, life is uncertain. We both know that. People do not always have the luxury of long courtships. When you find something real, something true, you hold on to it. Kane, Rosa whispered, her throat tight with emotion. I love you, Kane said simply. I love your strength and your compassion and your dedication to helping others. I love the way you see the world, finding beauty and purpose in things other people overlook. I love your laugh and your stubbornness, and the way you scrunch up your nose when you are concentrating on something difficult. I love everything about you, Rosa Hartwell, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Rosa's cheeks, but she was smiling through them. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Kane let out a whoop of joy that sent birds scattering from nearby trees, then pulled Rosa into his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. Rosa clung to him just as tightly, overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. She had not been looking for love, had convinced herself it was not meant for her, and yet here it was, fierce and true and utterly unexpected. Kane pulled back just enough to cup Rosa's face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy, he said solemnly. I know your work is important, and I will never stand in the way of that. We will figure out how to balance everything together. I love you, Rosa said, the words feeling both monumental and perfectly natural. I did not think I could have a life beyond my work, but you make me believe it is possible. It is more than possible, Kane said. It is going to be wonderful. He leaned in slowly, giving Rosa plenty of time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to. She met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and filled with promise. It was Rosa's first real kiss, and she felt it all the way to her toes, a warmth that spread through her entire body and made her understand, finally, what all the fuss was about. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Kane rested his forehead against hers. We should probably get back to town and start making plans, he said reluctantly, but I could stay here with you forever. We have forever, Rosa reminded him, the words still feeling miraculous on her tongue. A whole lifetime of forevers. They made their way back to Santa Rosa hand in hand, already discussing the practical details of their upcoming marriage. They decided to keep the wedding simple, just a small ceremony at the church with a few close friends. Rosa wanted to continue her work as an herbalist, and Kane supported that completely. The house that came with his foreman position was larger than Rosa's current place, with enough room for a dedicated workspace where she could prepare her medicines and see patients. The wedding took place on a sunny Saturday morning in early August of 1878. Rosa wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself with help from some of the women in town, and Kane stood at the altar in his best suit, his face glowing with happiness as he watched her walk down the aisle. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kane kissed Rosa with such enthusiasm that several people in the small congregation laughed and applauded. The reception was held at the restaurant where they had their first date, and it seemed like half the town turned out to celebrate with them. People whose lives Rosa had touched with her healing brought gifts and well wishes. Mr. Carson from the Triple Cross Ranch gave a short speech about what a fine foreman Kane would make, and how lucky the ranch was to have him. It was a perfect day, exactly what Rosa had wanted without even knowing she wanted it. Moving into the foreman's house was an adventure. Rosa brought her extensive collection of herbs, tinctures, and medical supplies. And Kane helped her set up a proper workroom that was far superior to the cramped space she had worked in before. The house itself was modest but comfortable, with a bedroom, sitting room, kitchen, and the extra room for Rosa's work. There was even a small barn for their horses, and a fenced yard that Rosa immediately began planning to turn into a medicinal herb garden. Married life suited them both. Kane would wake before dawn to begin his work at the ranch, managing the cowboys and overseeing the daily operations of the Triple Cross. Rosa would see patients in her workroom, prepare medicines, and make trips into town or out into the hills as needed. In the evenings, they would come together, sharing meals and conversation, helping each other with various tasks, simply enjoying the comfort of companionship after years of solitude for both of them. About a month after the wedding, Kane came home one evening to find Rosa in the yard, staking out plots for her herb garden. He watched her work for a moment, marveling as he often did at how lucky he was to have found her. "I have been thinking about something," he said, joining her in the yard. "What is that?" Rosa asked, looking up from her work. "That day we met, when I rode up on you gathering plants, my life changed completely. If that rustler had not shot me, if I had ridden in a different direction looking for help, if I had decided to just bind the wound myself and push through, I never would have found you. It makes me think about how many tiny decisions and coincidences have to line up perfectly for two people to find each other." Rosa set down her gardening tools and stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I have thought about that too. I almost did not go out that day. The weather looked threatening and I had plenty of supplies, but something made me go anyway, some instinct I did not even understand at the time. And then there you were." "It was meant to be," Kane said, pulling her close. "You and me, this life we are building together, I truly believe that." "So do I," Rosa said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "So do I." The months passed in a blur of work and happiness. Rosa's reputation as a skilled herbalist continued to grow, and people came from miles away seeking her help. Kane thrived in his new position as foreman, earning the respect of the cowboys he supervised and Mr. Carson's trust. Together, they found a rhythm that worked for them, supporting each other's goals while building a life that was more than either of them could have imagined alone. In early spring of 1879, Rosa began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited a few weeks to be certain, using her knowledge of herbs to confirm what she already knew in her heart. When she finally told Kane, he was so overcome with joy that he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing and whooping loud enough to startle their horses in the nearby barn. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, as if he could not quite believe it. "Rosa, we are going to be parents." "We are," Rosa confirmed, laughing at his enthusiasm even as happy tears streamed down her face. "In about 6 months, if my calculations are correct, late October or early November." Kane became even more attentive than usual during Rosa's pregnancy, constantly worried that she was working too hard or lifting things that were too heavy. Rosa found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she humored him because she knew it came from a place of love. She continued her work throughout the pregnancy, though she did have to modify some of her activities as her belly grew. Hiking into the hills to gather plants became more difficult, so Kane took on more of that work himself, following the detailed instructions Rosa gave him about what to look for and when to harvest. She was touched by how seriously he took the responsibility, often coming home with exactly the plants she needed and proudly presenting them like trophies. Their son was born on a chilly November evening in 1879. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Rosa, even with all her knowledge of healing, was genuinely afraid. But Kane stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her brow, offering encouragement even when she was too exhausted to respond. When their baby finally arrived, wailing lustily to announce his presence in the world, Rosa wept with relief and overwhelming love. They named him James Thomas Thornton, after Kane's father and Rosa's grandfather, hoping to honor the past while building toward the future. Little James was a healthy baby with Kane's green eyes and Rosa's dark hair, and both parents were instantly, completely besotted with him. "I did not know I could feel this way," Kane said one night as he cradled his sleeping son against his chest. "Like my heart is walking around outside my body, vulnerable to every possible hurt, and I would not have it any other way." "That is what love does," Rosa said softly, watching her husband and son with deep contentment. "It makes us vulnerable, but it also makes us stronger. We are capable of so much more when we have people to love and protect." Rosa took a brief hiatus from her work after James was born, needing time to recover and adjust to motherhood. But after a few weeks, patients began showing up at her door again, and she found herself easing back into her calling. It was more challenging with an infant to care for, but Kane helped as much as he could, often taking James with him to the ranch office where the baby would sleep in a drawer converted into a makeshift cradle, while Kane worked on the account books and schedules. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before, but also fuller and richer. Rosa could not imagine going back to her solitary existence before Kane. Even on the hardest days when James was fussy and her patients were demanding, and she was running on too little sleep, she was grateful for the life they had built together. When James was about 8 months old, Kane came home one evening with news. "Mr. Carson wants to retire," he said. "He is getting older, and the work is becoming too much for him. He has offered to sell me the Triple Cross Ranch at a very fair price, with the option to pay in installments over several years." Rosa stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "Kane, that is an enormous responsibility. And how could we possibly afford to buy an entire ranch?" "We could not, normally," Kane admitted. "But Mr. Carson is being incredibly generous with the terms. He trusts me to run the place well, and he would rather see it go to someone who will care for it properly than sell to the highest bidder who might just be looking to make a quick profit. And Rosa, this could be it. This could be the dream I told you about, owning our own land, building something lasting for James and any other children we might have." Rosa could see the hope and excitement in Kane's eyes, and she found herself catching his enthusiasm despite her practical concerns. "We would need to think carefully about this," she said. "Make sure the numbers work, that we can really manage it." "Of course," Kane agreed. "I would not make a decision this big without your input. We are partners in this, in everything. But Rosa, I think we could do this. I think we could make it work." They spent the next few weeks carefully reviewing the ranch's finances, discussing the implications of taking on such a huge responsibility, seeking advice from people they trusted. In the end, they decided to accept Mr. Carson's offer. It would be difficult, they both knew, but it was an opportunity that might never come again. The transfer of ownership took place in early spring of 1880. Suddenly, Kane and Rosa Thornton were not just employees but landowners, responsible for a working cattle ranch that employed over a dozen cowboys and encompassed thousands of acres of New Mexico Territory land. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Rosa found that her role evolved along with their circumstances. She was no longer just the herbalist but the ranch owner's wife, a position that came with its own set of expectations and responsibilities. She had to learn how to manage the household budget, supervise the ranch cook, and play hostess when Mr. Carson's business associates came to visit. It was challenging, but Rosa approached it the same way she approached everything else, with determination and a willingness to learn. She continued her work as an herbalist, though she had to be more selective about which cases she took on. She still treated anyone from the ranch who needed medical help, and she made her services available to people in town on certain days of the week. It was not as much as she had done before, but it was what she could manage, and she had to be content with that. The ranch thrived under Kane's management. He had a gift for understanding cattle and the land, knowing instinctively when to move the herds to fresh pasture, when to sell, when to hold back. He treated his cowboys fairly, paying them well and listening to their concerns, and in return, he earned their loyalty and hard work. Within a year, the Triple Cross was more profitable than it had been in a decade, and Kane and Rosa were able to start paying down their debt to Mr. Carson ahead of schedule. In the summer of 1881, Rosa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect and was not trying to do quite as much as she had during her first pregnancy. Their second son, Daniel Michael Thornton, was born in early spring of 1882, another healthy baby who looked remarkably like his older brother. "We make good babies," Kane observed one evening as he sat with a son on each knee, James now a curious toddler and Daniel a content infant. "We do," Rosa agreed, watching her family with a full heart. "Though I think we should give it a rest for a little while." 2 children under the age of 3 is quite enough for now, Kane laughed. "Agreed. Though I would not complain if we ended up with a houseful eventually. I always wanted a big family." "Let us see how we manage with these 2 first," Rosa said, but she was smiling. The truth was, she loved being a mother. It was different from her work as a healer, more personal and immediate, and she found deep satisfaction in nurturing these small lives she and Kane had created together. The years rolled past, each one bringing new challenges and joys. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing them to make improvements to the property and expand their herds. Rosa's herb garden flourished, providing much of what she needed for her medicines and saving her from having to make as many trips into the hills. James and Daniel grew into energetic boys who loved following their father around the ranch, learning about cattle and horses and the land from the time they could walk. In 1884, Rosa gave birth to their 3rd child, a daughter they named Caroline Rose Thornton. She was a delicate baby with Kane's green eyes and Rosa's serious expression, and both parents fell instantly in love with her. James and Daniel, now 5 and 2, were fascinated by their baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. "Our family is complete," Kane said the night Caroline was born, holding his daughter with the same wonder he had shown when James was born 5 years earlier. 3 healthy children, a successful ranch, and the love of my life by my side. I could not ask for more." "It is more than I ever dreamed possible," Rosa agreed. "That day you rode up on me in the canyon, injured and looking for help, I never could have imagined all of this. How did we get so lucky?" "I do not think it was luck," Kane said thoughtfully. "I think it was you and me, choosing each other every day, working together to build something good. We made this life, Rosa. We made these beautiful children and this home and this partnership. That is not luck. That is love and hard work and commitment." Rosa leaned her head on Kane's shoulder, watching their daughter sleep peacefully in his arms. He was right, she realized. What they had built together was not the result of chance but of countless small decisions, daily acts of love and support and compromise. They had taken the unexpected connection they found that day in the canyon and nurtured it into something strong and lasting. As the children grew, Rosa found new ways to balance her various roles. She taught James and Daniel about the medicinal plants in her garden, passing on the knowledge her grandmother had given her. James showed a particular aptitude for it, able to remember the properties of dozens of different herbs by the time he was 7. Daniel was less interested in plants but loved animals, spending every moment he could in the barn or out with the cattle, clearly his father's son in that regard. Caroline, even as a toddler, showed signs of having inherited Rosa's stubborn determination and Kane's practical nature. In 1886, when James was 7, Daniel was 4, and Caroline was 2, Rosa finally began the project she had dreamed about years earlier. With Kane's encouragement and help, she started working on a comprehensive guide to the medicinal plants of New Mexico Territory. She would spend her evenings after the children were in bed writing detailed descriptions of each plant, its properties, where to find it, and how to prepare it for various ailments. Kane would help with the illustrations, having discovered an unexpected talent for drawing detailed botanical sketches. It was slow going, fitting the work in around everything else they had to do, but Rosa found it deeply satisfying. This was her legacy, she realized, beyond the individual people she had helped over the years. This guide could help countless future healers, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost as the territory became more settled, and modern medicine increasingly replaced traditional remedies. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1888, the Triple Cross was one of the most successful operations in the territory, and Kane had fully paid off their debt to Mr. Carson. They were able to make significant improvements to the property, building a larger house that had enough room for their growing family and Rosa's work. The new house had running water from a well, a luxury that Rosa had not even dreamed of in her early days living alone in her small adobe house in town. They also built a dedicated clinic on the ranch property where Rosa could see patients. It was a small building, but it had everything she needed: shelves for her medicines, a table for examinations, and even a couple of beds for patients who needed to stay for observation. Word spread about the clinic, and people came from all over the territory seeking Rosa's help, knowing she would treat them fairly regardless of their ability to pay. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, winters that were harsh and took their toll, illnesses that swept through despite Rosa's best efforts to prevent them. In 1889, they lost several head of cattle to a mysterious sickness that Rosa could not cure despite all her knowledge. Kane took the loss hard, feeling responsible for the animals under his care. "You cannot control everything," Rosa told him gently as he sat on their porch one evening, staring out at the land with troubled eyes. "You are a good rancher, Kane, the best I know. But some things are beyond our power to prevent or fix. All we can do is our best and accept that sometimes our best is not enough." "I know you are right," Kane said, pulling her close, "but it does not make it easier. Just like I know you cannot save every patient who comes to you, but I also know every loss weighs on you. We carry those losses together," Rosa said. "That is what makes them bearable. I am so grateful I do not have to face the hard times alone anymore." "Neither of us will ever be alone again," Kane promised. "We are in this together, for better or worse, until death parts us." It was a promise they both kept faithfully through the years that followed. They supported each other through difficulties and celebrated each other's successes. They raised their children with love and taught them the values of hard work, compassion, and integrity. The Triple Cross Ranch became known not just as a successful cattle operation, but as a place where people were treated fairly and with respect, where a person's word meant something. In 1892, when James was 13, he announced that he wanted to become a doctor. Rosa was thrilled, seeing in her eldest son the same calling to healing that she had felt her whole life. Kane was equally supportive, though slightly bemused that his son wanted to go to medical school rather than take over the ranch. "Daniel will run the ranch," James explained with the supreme confidence of adolescence. "He is a natural with the cattle and the land. I want to learn about medicine, real medicine, so I can help people the way Ma does but with more knowledge and better tools." Rosa began preparing James for his eventual medical education, teaching him everything she knew and borrowing medical textbooks from Dr. Morrison in town for James to study. The boy threw himself into learning with impressive dedication, and Rosa could see that he had the mind and temperament for medicine. Daniel, true to his brother's prediction, showed increasing interest in every aspect of ranch management. By the time he was 10, he could ride as well as any of the cowboys, and he had a gift for reading the land and the animals that reminded Rosa of Kane at his best. Caroline, meanwhile, showed talents in multiple directions. She was interested in both healing and ranching, and she also had a remarkable head for numbers, often helping Kane with the ranch accounts. "We have made 3 remarkable children," Kane said one evening in 1893 as they watched their offspring at play in the yard. "How did we manage that?" "Good genetics," Rosa replied with a smile. "And a lot of love. Never underestimate what children can become when they are raised in a home full of love and encouragement." That same year, Rosa finally completed her guide to medicinal plants. It had taken 7 years of work, fitting it in around all her other responsibilities, but the finished product was impressive. Nearly 200 pages of detailed descriptions, illustrations, and practical advice for identifying and using the healing plants of New Mexico territory. She had it printed in Santa Fe, using money from the ranch profits, and distributed copies to doctors and herbalists throughout the region. The guide was met with enthusiasm and gratitude. Dr. Morrison told Rosa that it was one of the most comprehensive and practical medical resources he had encountered, especially for understanding the traditional remedies that many of his patients preferred. Rosa received letters from people she had never met, thanking her for preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. "You did it," Kane said, holding a copy of the printed guide with obvious pride. "You created something that will help people long after we are gone." "That is a real legacy, Rosa." "We did it," Rosa corrected. "I could never have finished this without your help and support. This belongs to both of us." The turn of the century found the Thornton family thriving. James was preparing to leave for medical school in Philadelphia, a prospect that filled Rosa with both pride and sadness. Daniel, at 16, was already indispensable around the ranch, and Kane had begun officially training him to eventually take over management. Caroline, at 14, had announced her intention to become both a rancher and a healer, seeing no reason why she should have to choose between her parents' professions. "She is stubborn enough to pull it off," Kane observed with amusement and love. "She gets that from you," Rosa countered. "From me? Rosa, you are the most stubborn person I have ever met. Our daughter comes by it honestly from both sides." Rosa laughed, unable to argue the point. Caroline was indeed a perfect blend of both parents, combining Rosa's determination and healing instinct with Kane's practical nature and understanding of the land. Whatever path she eventually chose, Rosa had no doubt their daughter would excel. In the summer of 1901, James came home from medical school for a visit, bringing with him a young woman he introduced as his fiancée. Alina was a nurse he had met at the hospital where he did his training, and it was clear within minutes of meeting her that she was perfect for James. She shared his passion for healing and his compassionate nature, and Rosa could see the way her son looked at Alina, with the same love and devotion that Kane had always shown Rosa. "She reminds me of you," Kane whispered to Rosa during the dinner celebrating James's engagement. "Smart, dedicated, completely immune to our son's charm." "James has charm?" Rosa asked innocently, earning a laugh from her husband. The wedding took place the following year, and it was a joyous occasion that brought together friends and family from across the territory. Rosa watched her firstborn son exchange vows with his bride and felt a bittersweet mixture of happiness and nostalgia. It seemed like just yesterday that James had been a baby in her arms, and now here he was, a man starting his own family. Daniel married a few years later, choosing a local girl named Margaret who had grown up on a neighboring ranch. She was a practical, hard-working young woman who loved ranch life as much as Daniel did, and Rosa welcomed her into the family with open arms. When Daniel and Margaret's first child was born in 1906, making Rosa and Kane grandparents, it felt like the cycle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. Caroline, true to her word, refused to be limited by conventional expectations. She worked alongside Daniel on the ranch, while also studying healing with Rosa, becoming skilled in both areas. She eventually married a cowboy named Samuel who worked for the Triple Cross, and together they managed a section of the ranch while Caroline also maintained a small healing practice for ranch families. The years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow. Mr. Carson died peacefully in his sleep in 1908, leaving behind fond memories and gratitude for the opportunity he had given Kane and Rosa. Dr. Morrison passed away in 1912, and Rosa felt the loss deeply, having considered him both colleague and friend. But there were far more happy occasions than sad ones. Grandchildren born, the ranch continuing to thrive, James establishing a successful medical practice that combined modern medicine with respect for traditional remedies. In 1918, as America was emerging from the Great War and the terrible Spanish flu pandemic, Kane and Rosa celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. It was a large celebration, with all three children, their spouses, and a growing crowd of grandchildren gathered at the ranch. Looking around at the family they had created and the life they had built together, Rosa felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after the party had ended and the house had finally quieted, Kane and Rosa sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they had worked for 4 decades. 40 years, Kane said wonderingly. Seems like yesterday and forever at the same time. "I know what you mean," Rosa replied, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "Sometimes I think about that day you rode up on me in the canyon, wounded and looking for help. What would have happened if you had ridden in a different direction? If I had not gone out that day? I would have spent my whole life looking for you without knowing what I was looking for," Kane said simply. "You are my home, Rosa. You always have been from that very first day. And you are mine," Rosa said softly. "The best decision I ever made was saying yes when you asked to court me. Everything good in my life has flowed from that one choice." Kane lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it with the same gentleness he had shown on their first date over 40 years earlier. "I helped you harvest plants that day," he said, "but you are right about what I really planted. I planted love, and look at the incredible harvest we have reaped." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary together. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful. Inside the house, Their children and grandchildren were settling in for the night, carrying forward the legacy of love and hard work that Kane and Rosa had established. Rosa thought about her grandmother and her mother, the strong women who had shaped her and taught her about resilience and compassion. She thought about the countless patients she had treated over the years, the lives she had touched and sometimes saved. She thought about the books she had written, preserving knowledge for future generations. But mostly, she thought about the man sitting beside her, the unexpected love who had transformed her solitary existence into a life fuller and richer than anything she could have imagined. "We did all right, didn't we?" Kane asked, as if reading her thoughts. "We did better than all right," Rosa corrected. "We did magnificently." And there, under the vast New Mexico sky, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and deeply loved, Rosa and Kane Thornton held hands and watched the night settle over their land, grateful for every moment of their journey together and confident that their legacy would continue long after they were gone. The herbalist who had once gathered plants alone had found not just help with her harvest but a partner in every sense of the word, someone who had indeed planted love that had grown and flourished beyond anything either of them could have dreamed. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic rescues, though it had certainly had its share of both. It was instead a story of two people who chose each other every day, who worked together to overcome obstacles, who built something meaningful and lasting through patience, dedication, and unwavering love. It was, in the end, the best kind of love story, one that was true,